alongside global business people impacting world economies. Well, to unpack this report, I'm now joined in studio by researcher at LUDENE2, LUDENE Brown. LUDENE, appreciate your time. I guess, is it unjustified or looking at the perception of Africa globally in the media?
Well, not at all. I think the global media's perception of Africa actually allows us to see the issues that we are faced with. And surprisingly, media tennis research has showed us that negative stories exceeds the awareness threshold compared to positive stories. However, what we have seen is that sports remains the golden thread that runs through all countries, the positive factor that drives some positive coverage, whereas other positive issues just stays below the awareness threshold.
Just run us through how you actually do this research. It must be quite difficult looking at it from a global perspective. I guess nationally you can follow it, and even from the African continent you can follow it, but internationally it's quite a big undertaking.
Indeed, however, due to our global outreach as a company, I mean, we analyze global TV, so this just allows us to have a footprint in all relevant countries encoding these stories.
So is it just television? What other media do you cover? I mean, is it radio, print? Is it all the forms of media?
Yes, well, the press release was just based on global TV coverage. However, apart from that, we look at your major financial print media, SA media, so print, radio, and broadcast, yes.
So this specific report was just on television?
Yes, it was.
And you're looking at, I mean, we do face tough battles, things like Boko Haram, Ebola, a lot of negative perception, but I mean, that's a reality.
Yes, it is a reality. However, I think as African media needs to take hold of the situation, whereas we need to promote constructive reporting, because it seems like media still leads by the whole logo of it bleeds, it leads.
Yep, I guess, and sells, I guess.
Yes.
And we're looking at, you've also done a bit here on the effects of the World Cup in 2010 as being short-lived. It was a great time, but it's now gone back and almost forgotten about.
Yes, and what has been significant is that while media coverage dipped after the World Cup, sports remains the positive factor that drives through positive coverage for most African countries. We saw this with Zimbabwe, despite, the domestic policies that the country has been faced with. Cricket and other sport factors remains a positive factor. We've seen it with South African media as well, whereas we're facing, domestic crime issues, sports brings that positive factor into the country.
I think there's a lot of ignorance involved in some of the international television coverage in terms of covering Africa. They often don't have reporters on the ground here. They're picking up media reports from elsewhere. Was this taken into account?
Yes, it was. However, when we compare local TV's coverage, so when we compare South Africa's local TV coverage to global media TV coverage, sentiment is not that far off. So South African media itself has a negative perception on South Africa itself.
So, I mean, we're almost to blame ourselves. I mean, it's often difficult, as you said, if it bleeds, it leads.
Yes.
That's the way it goes. According, obviously, to your research, the majority of African countries only receive prominent amounts of coverage in global media when the subject matter is negative. That's the business, I guess. I mean, it's hardly surprising.
Yes, it is the business. However, as I've said before, I think South African media needs to push forward constructive reporting, where we face problems, so provide solutions.
Or cover more good news stories,
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. And in terms of looking at Africa, obviously Nigeria and West Africa in terms of Ebola, a lot of focus given there.
Yes, terrorism and Ebola has been one of the most dominant factors throughout 2014. However, we've seen the Namibian election last year with its first electronic elections. This remained below the awareness threshold, despite the positive coverage that it generated.
Also looking at elections at the moment, Zambia in an election just seemed to cover a top was domestic security. This is terrorism, disease dominates perceptions. Accidents, I mean, it's horrible in a way that things like accidents and disease and health are reaching those headlines.
Yes, and again, it just outlines the main issues that Africa is faced with.
Apart from sport, what are the other things that could increase the positivity of media coverage in Africa?
Well, Africa's diverse cultural aspect is one thing that we could drive. Tourism is one thing that we could drive in the media.
And looking at the research based on analysis of over 100,000 reports, I mean, how do you actually, is there a mechanism in place? I mean, how do you monitor it?
Well, we break up the information in bits and pieces. So it's like a puzzle that you put together.
Do you have someone just sitting there watching the TV all day?
Yes, so
Really?
to say, yes.
Okay. And then based on that, they note down whether it's positive or negative.
Yeah, so based on that, we analyze the tone of the news article or the tone of the radio clip, and based on that, the researchers, we pull the data.
And looking, over 18,000 of those reports analyzed focused exclusively on Africa. The bottom line is, Africa is still getting some media coverage, but I guess in the places like the United States, it's not covered a whole lot.
No, definitely. And I mean, if we had to put things in perspective and compare Africa to other continents, we would just be at the bottom in terms of volume of coverage. However, despite the small amount of coverage, 80% or 90% of that is negative.
And in terms of where the coverage came from, is it across all international countries?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
So we look at China, we look at the UK, America, Switzerland, Germany, and so forth.
Well, yeah, not good news there. I'm chatting to media tenors. They've done a big research here. It's called Africa Must Break Free from Negative Perceptions. It's a report done by the International Agenda Setting at that conference. Very interesting to see how